Well, it happened after a historic beatdown last week. Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco, the general manager, both out from the Chargers. The Staley is kind of the more interesting one to me, as Staley is someone who was the talk of a lot of frustration with among Chargers fans. As it was interesting when he first got there. I actually was fascinated in what he was doing. I was kind of a fan of some of the stuff he was doing. The reality is his defensive mindset did work very well with the Rams, and people can say, "Oh, well, he had Aaron Donald, he had Jalen Ramsey." Other guys had those guys too and did not have the defensive success that Staley did there. So it was an interesting philosophy, but kind of a coaching philosophy that probably still only works if you have a couple of great players who can take on those bigger roles, specifically if you have someone who can stop the run all by themselves like Aaron Donald can. The defense never was good under Staley. The fourth down decision making was good. I mean, it was. People criticized it, but it did have some notable failures. But the reality is, what Brandon Staley was doing even just 2-3 years ago, every team is doing now. I mean, now it's considered weird if you punt on a 4th and 1 in your own territory. That's what he got criticism for. I think it was on his own 20, so a bit extreme, but nonetheless, still, I don't necessarily think that's the issue, but it also is just an interesting factor where he got a ton of criticism for those 4th down decision-making calls early on. He kind of stopped doing that, though. I wouldn't say that he went full, I don't know which head coach you want to use, but, one of these old school head coaches that never goes for it. He wasn't that, but he did stop with the aggressive 4th down decision-making, which I think made it worse. I think if you're going to be the analytic guru guy, you kind of got to stick with it. You can't just, pull off. And I do wonder, how much of it was due to the criticism. Was there a call from upstairs saying, hey, listen, you can be a bit aggressive on these 4th down decision makings. You can't, you can't be going for it every single time like you want to. But at that point, he wasn't great analytically anymore. His defense wasn't working, and every offensive move they made didn't work. And Tom Telesco certainly just as guilty for some of those things. I mean, you think about the big swings they've taken that didn't really work out. The Khalil Mack one, I would say, did work out. I think that he did do what they asked him to do. But the, J.C. Jackson, that was just obviously a massive misfire. There's no getting around it. It's a misfire I think a lot of people would have made. They were not the only team trying to get J.C. Jackson, but at the same time, it didn't work out. I think Quentin Johnston thing, him not working out, those are kind of the two big ones you look at. They haven't been terrible across the board, and a lot of people thought that this roster could be competing for at least a playoffs spot. I think most people thought they'd be a playoff caliber of team. I believe I had them just missing the playoffs in my predictions. So it's not like this team was completely devoid of talent, but when you're losing, when you're giving up 63 to a team that just just scored 0, not even a week ago, probably time to move on. And this is the perfect time to do it because they just got really embarrassed on prime time. So there is that. On top of it, you have to factor in the, now you have a longer week. And the reason why I like doing this is you can start to hire around now. You can start to look at players who, look at coaches who maybe want to get a head coaching job. Maybe you can get interviews in earlier so you don't have to wait till after the season is over. Therefore, you're not, interviewing certain players or I keep saying players. So you don't have to interview certain coaches, during the playoffs. Maybe you can get it before the playoffs when things aren't quite as intense. You can get some interviews done then potentially. There's also I think that you want to keep a winning culture, or I guess not have a complete losing culture, maybe is the way to put it. And if you feel like the team is starting to give up on your head coach, pulling the plug and getting a new guy in there, usually that does kind of give you a boost of a shot of adrenaline a lot of times. Because, listen, if it's a coach is going to get fired anyway and you're a player, you're like, well, whatever. I'm just going to make sure I look good personally. But now all of a sudden, if there's a new guy who's going to be the interim head coach. I don't believe that has been announced who the interim will be just yet. But if there is going to be a situation where you have an interim head coach, well, not your player, you're like, okay, well, this guy is getting his one opportunity. Like, want to make sure I, can hopefully get a win for him because that can help out his career. That little added boost usually wears off after a week, but it usually will give you a week. So it's very fascinating. I think the question, to some degree, is what's next for the Chargers? Quite frankly, not a bad job to get. Again, depends on how people have different opinions on Herbert. I think Herbert is really good. I don't think he's quite as good as like the Mahomes tier. I don't think anyone's as good as Mahomes, but I think you could even argue he's maybe not quite as good as like the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow next tier. And yes, I do think Josh Allen is in that next tier, despite the fact that he has a little bit of turnovers. I still think he's very good. I think Herbert's, I kind of feel like he's maybe a tier 2 quarterback, right? Maybe not the tier 1, but a tier 2 quarterback. He's very good. And when you have a quarterback that's that good and that young, definitely it's something you're going to want to take a look at. And do you go with, I've heard Bill Belichick rumors, which I don't know. I mean, it's an option. It's an option on the table. I think that where I would be concerned if I'm the Chargers, though, is do you want to go with another defensive-minded head coach? Quite frankly, there's a reason why I don't like defensive-minded coaches, and I'm always kind of a believer in go with the offensive-minded head coach, largely due to the fact that I think you get two different ways. You get either, someone like Brandon Staley, he's sort of more of he's a new school defensive-minded coach. You're trying something new. And to be honest, I don't hate the Chargers. Let's go out. Let's get someone who might be onto something. Turns out he wasn't. It is what it is. But the reason why I don't love defensive-minded coaches is usually they coach to help out their defense. They punt on 4th and 1. They run the ball a lot to keep their defense rested. Things like that. When you want to be having more of an offensive-minded coach, for me personally, I'm always a big fan of anyone who's worked with Kyle Shanahan seems to work out. Anyone who's worked with Sean McVay seems to work out, so maybe go in that direction. I'm blanking on the Lions offensive coordinator, which is weird because I've said his name 1,000 times. I can't remember him, but he feels like he's going to be, one of the top candidates as well. That's where I would go if I'm the Chargers at this point. Again, you could do worse than Bill Belichick, right? I mean, I think that a guy who's won 8 Super Bowls total, 2 as a coordinator, 6 as a head coach, although I think you can maybe, there's people I'd be more interested in if I'm the Chargers personally, but definitely someone I would also pay attention to. So, yeah, fascinating situation with the Chargers and with the, hey, credit to the Raiders. You were able to, beat the Chargers so bad they got rid of their head coach. But yeah, probably the right move. But again, just because it didn't work out doesn't mean analytics aren't smart. Just means that maybe Brandon Staley isn't. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.